Hi class, in this video we're going to work towards adding update capability to our application, and we're going to use our SQL Server application. Before starting this project, I created a copy of the project folder. Now internally some of the names are the same, so there could be issues with TFS, but if you want to save a copy of your original work, I think that's a great idea because we are going to be making a lot of changes. For me, I'm going to delete the Access project, at least remove it from our solution. Now it's going to stay in this folder, so I could access it again or bring it back into the solution if I wanted to. But right now it's out of my way, and I don't have to worry about accidentally working on the wrong version of something because we have several different versions. Now, in order to update our data, the first thing that we're going to need are some text boxes on our form that show the associated data. So I'm going to grab a label and put it on my form. This is going to be my ID. And I want another label. Make this our first name. And our second name. I guess that would be last name, huh? Was in number mode. And our phone number. Now I want some text boxes to go with those. So this I'm going to name TXT BX ID. Another one that will be TXT BX first name. Okay, short there. Another one. TXT BX last name. And finally, our phone number. Now, I'd like these to all be the same size, or at least a little bit closer. Our ID really doesn't need to be that big. Phone number about the same as those. Now, on our labels, I'm going to select them all. And I'm going to align their rights. And then I'm going to select all of my text boxes and align their lefts. Now I want to select all of these things, a rubber band selection there, and they look like they're kind of different distances apart. There it is. Make vertical spacing equal. Well, that was not what I wanted. Not at all. Look at that craziness. Must be because I rubber band selected. So move these two up just a little bit. Looks pretty good, and I'm going to put a button, copy that button, and this button is going to now say OK, and I'm going to name it BTN OK. Okay, so we have some nice text fields here to use for our program. Let's go into our form load and first set this up so that when our form first opens, all of these fields and this button are disabled. So I'm going to double click on a blank spot on my form. Now in my code, remember I have the code to fill the array, the list box, and that's about it. So I'm going to add in a form load procedure, and I'm going to be probably doing some enabling and disabling of these buttons often. So I think I'll set up a method to do that, and I'll call it enable disable. Now for this one, I want the enable disable value to be false so that they'll be disabled. Let's create that method real quick. It wants a Boolean, and we'll call it val. How's that? Now, when we receive this Boolean, we're going to set, first of all, our button OK dot enable property to whatever val is passed to us. We're going to set our text box ID to that value. So we'll be setting all of these to false from that form load. Last name. And finally, our phone number. Now that method's going to be quite handy for us because we'll be able to just call it anytime we want to enable or disable all of those text boxes and that button. So enable or disable the button and text boxes for our member properties. Awesome, that should be all we need to do in our form load. So we're setting all of those things to disabled. Let's run this. Right now, notice it's all disabled. Great. If I load data, we get our data loaded and looks good. All right. So we need to do something in this form to control our text box area over here on the side. There are a few things left over in our program from when we switched to using our DataAccess class. So I'm going to delete these to comment out our code while we're working on things. And then sometimes we find that we can delete that. We never use the database reader. Now this message that we never use a member is incorrect. We do use it. We use it in our for each loop, and somehow it's not acknowledging that. Now, speaking of our for each loop and cleaning up some leftover things, I noticed that we still have our load event enclosed in a try-catch. We've actually moved all the database access code out of this method, so we really don't need that try-catch anymore. So I'm going to delete that and arrange my code. Now, I think that as I create this application, I'm going to need to be able to cause our load event to occur again. So I think it would be good for us to create a load method that we can call. Let's call it load items, and we'll just use all of this code from our load click event. So I'm going to cut it and paste it. Then in our load click event, we will call this new load items method. Because we're going to be calling this more than just when our form opens, let's add in some code to clear out the list box items before we load them again. There we go. Now we should have a nice clean list of information. As a last item, I think I'm going to take this update to our message out, cut it, and return it back to the form load. That way, if we call this reload method from an ad or something like that, we'll display the appropriate message from that method that called. All right, so we're getting to have a few methods here. Our load button is going to be executed by our form. When it starts up, it's going to call the load items method, which is going to clear out our list box, call our member class to get all the members, and then for each member, we're going to add it to the list box. So I did a lot of code updates there, so I'm going to try to run it. Make sure I didn't mess anything up. Can still load data successfully. Okay, great. Now, when we look at these new list box items, I would like to be able to have people add new items and update the members that are already in the list and delete members that are in the list. So pretty, well-rounded application here is what we'd like to have. So I'm going to think about what we want to do first. Let's add some buttons to our program. And I'm just going to be kind of like not the best here and just create a small button. This one's going to be my add button. Oops. And I'm going to put a plus sign in as the text. And I'm going to name it BTN add. Now I want to fix it up just a little bit. It's great. So if somebody clicks our add button, we want to enable all of these text boxes to allow them to type information into the text boxes. So let's implement that code. I'm going to double click my new add button. So let's see, we're going to call our enable disable method. And we're going to say we want to set all of their enabled properties to true. Open them up. And I want to have the text box that is their ID be the focus of our program. Whenever we add a new member, we're going to want to make sure that all of those text boxes are empty to start. So I'm going to create a method for that. Just do it in the first place, and then we won't have to change things later. Set each of them to a null string. Oops, phone number. Okay, now we've got a method to clear out all of our text boxes. So when somebody clicks add, I'm going to enable all of those items plus the OK button, and then I'm going to make sure that there is no text in any of those text boxes from some previous function. And I'm going to make sure that I can know that they clicked an add button whenever we use our OK button. So let's create a new class level variable here. This is going to be an integer, and I want it to be our selected item. I'm going to initialize it to -1, which, if you remember, means there is no item in the list selected, and we'll use that later in our code. Now back to our add method. When somebody clicks on that, I'm going to make sure that that selected item is equal to -1, because we're adding a new item and we don't want anything to be left over. So even if they had currently had something selected, something displayed, I want to clear that out. So let's try our new methods and see how they work. We should be able to click the plus sign even if we don't load any data. Our cursor goes over to the ID field. We can type some data. Now, one more thing that I would like to do is I want to set that phone number equal to a default value because it's kind of time consuming. And then we don't have to worry about typing something in every time. We can just let it default to that. So we got everything set. Now, when they click the OK button, looking at our form, we're going to take this data here that was typed in, and we're going to create a new member object from it. And then we're going to use that new member object to create a new row in our member table. There are some things that we need to do, though, to get prepared for that. So first of all, I want to look at our member class. In our member class, if I look at our properties, we made this comment and said getters, we only had read-only access. Well, let's fix that now, because if we're going to allow update, we're going to have getters and setters. Now to add the setters for each of our fields is no big deal. Set equal lambda. We're going to say that we want to set ID equal to the value that was supplied to us. On the first name, we want to set first name equal to that value. A setter for our last name. And finally, our phone number. Okay, now we have setters. Oops. Look, I was going to say, oh, that's a duplicate. You can't do that. But you can with value, because I know that's the parameter field that I'm going to use. I started messing up there at the end all the way, didn't I? Set lambda, phone number equal value. Making sure you got that syntax down right. All right, now we have setters for all of our different properties, so we'll be able to set those different values. The next thing I'd like to do is take a look at our constructors. And in our constructors, we created a default no-art constructor, and then we created a constructor that just had our first name and our last name fields. Let's create a constructor now that handles all of our data fields. So this one is going to have our ID, first name, last name, and phone number. Now in our constructor, we're going to set up each of those class fields. And remember, if I had some sort of weird code in my setter, I could run it instead of just accessing the class fields directly. But we don't. That should initialize our member object. We've done a really good job with commenting on this. So this is going to be a constructor for our fully populated member row. And we shouldn't really need anything else in our constructors. So let's collapse these down. Properties are updated, constructors are updated. Now, what about methods? We said because we were doing a 3-tier architecture we wanted to make sure that all calls from our form, our user experience, to our DataAccess class went through our business objects. We don't want that communication to happen directly. So let's create some new methods here that are going to be our linkage between those two. First of all, I'm going to say that we're going to have an add member method. And in this method, we're going to expect a parameter that's going to pass us a member to add. Or do we just want to use this current one? We just use this current one. We don't need an add to it. And that's sent to us, right? So there should already be a member instance. So we don't want this to be static. For our add member, I'm just going to add a template here. Give us a to-do. And we could do that for all of the different update methods that we can think of. Add, update. I don't really want to call that add, so I'm going to change that to insert. That would be the correct SQL terminology. And we'll want to be able to delete. Now, as we add this functionality to our application, we'll implement the code that's required in these methods. But that's what we need to do for our member class right now. So we added our insert member, update member, and delete member method. In our DataAccess class, we'll need the same type of things. So let's take a look at our DataAccess class. Right now, we have our open method and our close method, our read member method that reads all of the members and creates that DB reader, and then our Arraylist method that uses all of those others. Now, the first thing that I'd like to update is in our Arraylist method, if you remember, we're only populating our member object with the first name and last name. Let's revise that. Go back where we were. And I want to add in the student ID. So let's see, student ID, first name, last name, and finally, phone number. Okay, so now each of the member objects that we put into our array to send back for our list box are going to be fully populated objects. We've added the constructor to our class to be able to handle that, and we should be able to pull those out. So that's a good update. Now let's create a new method. This will be a static method. It's going to be our insert member. When we insert a member into the database, we're going to expect to have an instance of a member object to use to populate that row in our database. We'll call it INS member for insert. So in our insert, we want to take all of that data that was passed to us in this member object and use it to create a new instance of our member table, a new row. So we have a specific syntax for the insert statement. See if I can find the example for you. In your textbook, it's in chapter 14, they have an example of an insert statement. The keyword is, of course, insert, then the keyword into, then our table name that we want to insert data into. After our table name, we have this optional set of parameters that is our column names. Our column names are separated by commas, and they're within parentheses, and they must match exactly with the column names in the database. Then we have the values parameter. The values parameter is followed again by a list of data. This is the data that should be inserted into the corresponding column. So the values are in the same order as the columns. So in this example, 1123 will be the student ID that's inserted. Kathy will be the first name. Liza will be the last name, and this will be the phone number. Notice that the string data is contained within single quotes. So we're going to build a string that is going to end up looking just like this to be passed to our SQL command processor. So in our insert method, I want to create a comment here. When we get done building our string, we want it to look like this insert into statement. So again, these are our column names exactly. And then the values that we want inserted are going to be such as our ID, last name, our first name, and a phone number. Now all our data is string data, so it all has to be enclosed within the single quotes when it's passed to the database server. So that means we have to make sure those single quotes exist in the string that we build. We're going to close this string with a semicolon for the server. So each of these things is important in our syntax. So when you're looking at this SQL code, it's not too complicated. It's just really as basic as it seems. We're just trying to build this so that it comes out in this syntax and includes our data from this member that was passed to us. So we're going to start out in our string with the insert into member table. After that, we want all of our columns. And then close parentheses. On our next line then, we're going to start out with a space and values as a keyword. Values is going to be followed by an opening parenthesis and a single quote. Now the first thing that we want in the list of values is going to be our insert member's ID. After the ID, we want a single quote, a comma, a space, and another single quote to start the next field. We want our last name plus single quote, comma, space, single quote. Now you can see why I like to put them on their own line, because we can make sure that we have the embedding information set up properly. And our last field then is going to be our phone number. Now, after the phone number, we're going to need that closing single quote, our closing parenthesis, and a semicolon, because that's the last piece of data. Then finally, we can close our C# statement with a semicolon, and that should build our complete string that we want to pass to the SQL server. Now you're welcome to try this using Access or using SQL Server. Issue this SQL statement in the SQL processor and run it and see if you can figure out how to get things inserted properly. Now once we've got our SQL built, we can call our open to connect to the database. Then we're going to create an SQL object to run this command. It's going to be just an SQL command object. Now, the SQL command is going to be given the SQL to execute and the connection to use for that execution. Once we've created that object, and notice that our connection had to be open before we could create that object. Excuse me. We're going to use a new method to execute our SQL command. That's going to end this method. Let's build our exec command method. In our execute command method, we're going to do something that is a little different than our other SQL accesses. We're going to embed it within a try-catch. That part's the same, but we're going to use our command object. I need that passed to this method as a parameter. I want that SQL command object. We'll call it the command. It'll be our insert command for this method. So I want to take the command and try to execute it. But I'm going to use this special method, execute non-query. This means that we're doing some sort of update, and so the command processor should not expect a result set of data to be returned, because no data will actually be returned by executing this command. Instead, a message will be returned that says something like one row successfully inserted. So this is a non-query type of SQL command that we would like to execute. So that should take care of it. It's going to take this command object that we've built that contains our insert code, and it's going to execute it. Now, if we have any issues, let's catch our problems. And we're going to do our console.error.writeLine on that exception message so that it can be output. Lastly, we will have a finally clause that will execute our close of the database. Because even if we received some sort of error in our query, non-query query, we want to close that connection. We don't ever want to leave those connections open. Now I set this up as a method because we'll be able to execute it for our insert command, for our update command, and also for our delete command. So now we have this built into our DataAccess class. We called it insert member. Let's go back to our member class and fix this up. We're going to call our DataAccess class insert member, and we're going to pass this member object. And that's the one that we want inserted, right? Because we've already created that member object. Great. So now we have our add built into our member class, and we have our add built into our DataAccess class. Again, I know it seems like a lot of overhead, but we're keeping everything separate and simple. So where are we now? Well, let's take a look at our form. We've created it so far so that when someone clicks this button, all of these text boxes become enabled. The OK button becomes enabled, and we set the cursor here ready for our user to type an ID. Our theory would be they would type in this information and click OK to add that row to the database. So let's add that code. I'm going to double click this OK button. And in our OK button, the first thing we're going to do is make sure that our selected item is -1. Because if we're in an add mode, we've got everything set that way, right? Let's make sure. Yeah, if somebody clicks add, we said, oh, set that selected item to -1 because we don't have anything selected. We're going to go into add mode. So if it is equal to -1, just like we thought, we need to use our member object to create a new member. Oops, we don't need a new member, sorry. We need to pull that member out of our we need a new member, right? And this member is going to be based on whatever the user's typed. So we're going to be using our text box ID, our text box last name, our text box first name, dot text, and finally our text box phone number. And that will build us a nice member instance. Now we can use that member instance to call our member class. In our member class, we set up our add, right? So let's see, we want to do a member dot insert member. Now remember, our insert member is going to use our current member instance, which is this one that we just created, and try to insert that into the database. If that insert hopefully goes well, we're going to update our message to say member added, and then we're going to update our list box. What did we call that method? Load items. Perfect. Now, we should be ready to test, I think. We don't have any errors, it doesn't seem like. Pretty amazing. All right, so I want to test this add button. First, I'm going to load data. Oops, I crashed. What's the matter? Index out of range exception. Okay, let's stop. I think our student ID column has an uppercase D. Let me try that again. So I said we have to match exactly. No, it's still mad at me. Let's see if we can tell anything from our locals. Well, I will be right back. Do some debugging. Thank you. Continuing on, I commented out the statement to pull the student ID out of the reader and replaced it with just a literal. And if I do that, I can load properly. So I know in my debugging, the problem has to do with this student ID column. So I brought up SQL Server Management Studio, and I look at my table design, and I see that I named this table column just ID. So I wasn't consistent with access. Happens, right? But of course, we always try to be careful and be as consistent as we can be. Now that should fix the issue. Let's check. Great. So we've got some data loaded. That was a little unexpected testing there. I want to add now a new member. So I'm going to give this member a number, an ID. I'll leave that phone number and click OK. Now I see that the member was added, but I don't see them listed here. If I click load data again, I still don't see them listed here. I also noticed that I would like to clear out these text boxes after the member was added. Looking at my output screen, remember we sent our error output to a right-line so that we could catch it. It says unclosed quotation mark. Okay. So let's see what's wrong there. In our DataAccess, in our insert command, we've got values, single quote, ID, close single quote, comma, single quote, last name, close single quote, comma, single quote, first name, single quote, comma. There it is, huh? Single quote, whoops, let's stop running. Single quote, phone number plus close single quote. Okay, try again. Got it. I'm going to load the data because I want to see who we've got. Add. Joe Schmo. Now we get a message that he was added. Here it is again. Invalid column name student ID. Duh. Let's fix that. Probably should have fixed it in the database, but I didn't. Make you remember all of these things. Ah, Joe finally showed up. So now we can see that we have all of our data in the database. Everything's looking great, right? So now I'd like to go a little bit further with our application, but for this video, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.